Today's episode is brought by Work in Estonia. Working in Estonia is a governmentally funded initiative to support Estonian rapidly growing ICT and technology sector. Their area of expertise is talent attraction management by introducing Estonia as a top choice company for talented IT people to come here. And also they help locally support those talents to retain and integrate them to Estonian environment.
And today's guest is Joe O'Connor. He's a director and co-founder of the world's first Center of Excellence in Work Time Reduction, a global partnership initiative with leading people-first transformation company Curium Solutions.
Hi, my name is Katariin.
And I'm Reet.
Welcome to Listen TalentHub podcast. Today, we are going to talk about 4-day work week. Hi, Joe.
Hi there.
So let's start, before we go into the 4-day work week and start discussing maybe a little bit about you and your background. So maybe you can tell us something that we cannot read from your LinkedIn.
I don't know. A lot of things are on social media these days, so I'm not sure what you can find online and what you can't. So I'm from rural Ireland. I'm from a place which is really in the middle of nowhere. So we moved back there during the pandemic. It's about a 15-minute drive to the nearest shop. So it's been a big change now moving to New York City and now Toronto, having kind of come from the middle of nowhere. Let me think. One other random fact. I got into American football as a 12-year-old kid, which was kind of strange for somebody growing up in Ireland. So I'm really enjoying living on that side of the world now because I used to have to stay up really late at night to watch any games. It was on at like 12 p.m. But now it's on at a normal time. So that's much easier for me.
Great life hack.
Yeah.
Also, do you practice 4-day work week yourself?
I do. I would say that I have a reduced hour work week. There are some weeks that looks like a true traditional 4-day week. There are some weeks where maybe it's shorter days. I obviously run my own organization, so I've got quite a bit of flexibility. Often I might use a Friday morning to, do an hour or two of deep focused work. But I tend to try to stick to kind of Friday lunchtime where possible to clock off.
So it's just, what is this traditional work week, 4-day work week?
So I think when people talk about a traditional 4-day work week, it's typically that, you're working Monday to Thursday or Tuesday to Friday, 8-hour days, and you kind of really protect that time. And certainly in my case, as a business owner and as an entrepreneur, I think there's a more discretionary, flexible application of that. And I think that there are some other industries which we might get to as we have the conversation, where there needs to be that little bit of greater flexibility in terms of how the policy is actually applied.
Okay, I see. But hey, take us back from the beginning of the project. You started with the research. So why did you start it at all?
So I first got interested in this subject in Ireland back in 2018. I was leading a research project in the Irish public sector where it was on work-life balance and a whole load of related issues. But one of the big findings for me was that we discovered that we had a lot of working parents, mostly women, who were already working reduced hour work weeks, often 4-day weeks. And they were doing so as a kind of voluntary initiative. They had taken an equivalent reduction in salary to do so. This is quite common for people coming back from maternity leave. And when we actually started to look at the data and interview their managers and interview the employees themselves, we found that almost universally, their experience was that their responsibilities in the job were the same. Their expectations were the same. The output they were producing each week was the same as it was when they were working 5 days. So that kind of told me two things. First, we have, a gender equality issue in the workplace whereby, a universal reduction in work time could really make a big difference in addressing. But also, secondly, that this concept, Parkinson's law, that I talk about a lot in my work now, which basically means that a task expands to fill the time available for its completion, that holds true in an awful lot of modern work. So I think in many ways, working parents were the kind of early demonstration that actually, when you focus on outcomes in less time, you can often find the kind of efficiencies that are necessary in order to be able to reduce the hours in the work week.
I guess me and Catherine here can relate easily, as we both have 2 kids, and definitely you're getting more effective and efficient when you have many things on the table.
Yeah, 1 hour seems much longer when you're becoming a parent.
For sure.
And you get more things done. But okay, so it was a you get into it, and it was a research. So how many people or how many companies was or still are involved to this?
So back then, that was kind of the catalyst that got me interested in this. I started looking into some of the early trials and research projects that had been happening in Iceland and Denmark and New Zealand. So I set up the first project on this in Ireland before the pandemic. Back then, this was something which for most people was kind of a crazy idea. And then COVID happened, and it kind of changed everything. There was a huge increase in demand, huge increase in interest from both from leaders and from employees in this concept. And so in response to that, I created the first ever pilot program and research project on a 4-day work week, originally in Ireland. This was something that I developed in collaboration with University College Dublin and also Boston College in the States. It was originally intended to be a very small-scale project, really to provide some support for a handful of employers. And then we kind of found ourselves at the crest of a wave. I moved to New York to start studying this at Cornell. I took over as the CEO of an organization called 4-Day Week Global, who are interested in doing something similar in the US to what I had done in Ireland. And in the end, we expanded that model to accommodate global trials in the UK, in North America, in Australasia. And in the end, in those programs in 2021 and 2022, a couple of hundred employers, about 10,000 employees in the end took part in those programs. So it was a very quick acceleration of what was intended originally to be a very small-scale concept.
So what were the main outcomes? So we already heard about the benefit that women are getting back their full salary as they are doing the same job. But what was the other outcomes or the learnings?
I would say for me that the big takeaway from the evidence that we've seen coming in from these global trials, which is really quite consistent across all of the different cohort groups that we have seen, is that shorter work weeks are first of all leading to happier, healthier employees. We're seeing a whole wide range of improvements across different well-being indicators. In addition, we're seeing that it's leading to companies which are finding it easier to recruit and to retain top talent. And that often it's almost counterintuitively leading to more productive, more efficient organizations. And that's because the shorter work week, in a way, almost acts as the reverse of that Parkinson's law that I talked about earlier, where instead of a task expanding to fill the time available, this is acting as a forcing function whereby people are really challenged to figure out how can we streamline our operations? How can we improve our processes? How can we change our work practices? So this is something that has seen really very positive benefits for the individual employees involved, which is maybe not surprising. But for some people, they are surprised when they see the kinds of very positive company level findings that have been coming out of these trials as well.
I mean, everything sounds super positive. Everything it came out good. Are there any risks as well for the companies?
Of course. Well, I would say it is a risk. Because to do this, it is a strategic risk because, it is for most companies, it is a trial. So therefore, no matter how well designed and how well planned your trial is going to be, there are always going to be things that you're going to need to adjust to and that you're going to need to course correct. So this is not a guaranteed success. I'm certainly not coming here saying that this would work for every single company. It takes a certain culture, very much one of trust and autonomy. It takes a commitment to operational excellence. I talk about this as an operational excellence project in disguise, whereby this isn't like, flicking a light switch and you reduce people's work time and all of a sudden they automatically become more productive. This is something that requires a really significant commitment from leaders, managers, and employees in partnership, working together to figure out how can we make the changes necessary to accommodate this reduction in work time? But I think, what we've seen is that for those organizations that have managed to figure out how to pull this off, and we've seen now companies of different shapes and sizes from a whole range of different industries manage to do this, I think the benefits can be really quite significant. So it is a risk, but it is a very worthwhile risk, I think, if you can get it right.
Are there any limitations? So you already mentioned that it's about leadership and all the like training, and you can't just let's switch it and hope the outcome just be there. But are there like any limitation in industry, or what are the greatest examples you have seen that actually been working out that you didn't believe yourself? Example.
Sure. So it is true to say that the vast majority, the volume effect in terms of the critical mass of organizations who've adopted this has come in traditional white collar, what would have been more desk-based, knowledge-based, creative-based work. That is true to say. But then on the other side, we have seen success stories in manufacturing, in retail. In the last year, we've seen Medibank, the largest health insurer in Australia, have started a trial. Unilever, the customer goods giant in New Zealand, have adopted this. So there's definitely examples of both major global brands and also organizations from industries that maybe you wouldn't necessarily associate with the 4-day work week who've managed to do this successfully. And I think it all comes down to a question of definition, right? Because for a lot of people, when they hear 4-day work week, they hear, everybody has Friday off. And we know in customer-facing roles, where there's a significant amount of reliance on being available and providing service coverage to the customer across 5 days, maybe even in some cases 6 or 7 days, that's simply not going to work. So in those cases, we are talking about a model of shorter work week, which relies upon a schedule, a rostering arrangement that maintains coverage across the 5 days. So, I think if you think about it, often the industries that people say, well, the 4-day week wouldn't work there, in many cases, they're not working a 5-day 9 to 5 either. So we're not saying that every single job role or profession should move to, Monday to Thursday, 9 to 5. That's why my organization, Work Time Reduction Center of Excellence, we're trying to broaden this conversation. It's not just about 4-day work week. There are a variety of different reduced hour work models, whether that's shorter days, 9-day fortnights, half-day Fridays, that can work in very different settings and very different contexts.
I see. So you already mentioned one obstacle, like it's like if it's a customer facing and you have to be there 8 to 5 or whatever amount. Are there any other limitations as well? Just not the customer facing, but something else?
I would say if you look at why organizations fail at this, typically this comes down to, we've seen some organizations who have failed in the early stages. They've had some teething problems, early challenges, and eventually made it work. And often that comes down to, not intentional, structured enough planning, because this is something which, as I said, it's not a magic wand. It is something that requires a major effort on behalf of everyone involved. We've seen organizations who have, experienced other challenges unrelated to the shorter work week. So, for example, a change in their financial circumstances, a change in leadership, which might cause them to change direction. I would say a lot of the challenges to this either fall into one of two categories. They're either operational or logistical. So it is things like, figuring out how can we arrange the scheduling, how can we kind of make our operations leaner and more efficient in order to accommodate this. Sometimes those are the easier challenges, they're what I would call they're just really a down and dirty process improvement project, The bigger challenge is often on the other side. It's the kind of cultural challenges. It's the mindsets. It's the shift in behaviors for people who are used to, working in very chaotic, high intensity, up-tempo work environments and being able to kind of switch and say, what, I'm not gauging my professional standards anymore by, the commitment of being prepared to go the extra mile in terms of working 9, 10, 11, 12 hours a day. I'm going to gauge my professional standards based on I can get the same quality of work done as my competitors in less time. And that's the shift that I think for some people can be quite a challenge.
I see. So it's all about the preparation as well. So how long should be the preparation? Is it 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years?
I would say it definitely depends on the complexity and the size of the organization. So if you're a global organization that operates across multiple time zones, countries, locations. You've got a lot of different functional groups in the organization. So you might have some frontline staff, but you might have also some much more traditional back office staff, where actually when you're designing a pilot, it might look differently for different parts of the organization. And you're thinking about what are the interdependencies between some groups and other groups, and how are we going to make that work? I would say that's probably a longer process of preparation, and maybe you might start with a trial in one part of the organization and expand out from there. I think for the majority of certainly SMEs, typically the journey that we take organizations through, that we work with, starts with what we call a diagnostic process. So it's about a 4 to 6 week process whereby it's almost like the feasibility study. It's figuring out, how ready is this organization to adopt a shorter work week, figuring out in advance what are the barriers and the challenges that they need to overcome. So we call it a pre-mortem. It's like the opposite of a post-mortem. So, how, if this is going to fail, how might it fail? And then looking at the kind of pros and cons of those different options, those different models that I mentioned earlier. If at that point the organization is kind of ready to say, okay, we're ready to commit to going ahead with a pilot or a trial, typically then we'd recommend a 2 to 3 month planning and preparation phase. So people getting ready. You want to get to the point that by the time you actually start, you've figured out to a great extent how to make it work from an operational perspective. So that's a really critical period. I would say that's almost more important than the trial itself in terms of success and failure. And then typically we see organizations do 6-month trials. Data quality tends to be better than a 3-month trial. Also allows people a little bit more time to kind of adjust and course correct to things that they're seeing during the trial. And then at that point, you assess it. Some organizations will extend the trial. Some organizations will make it permanent. Some organizations will tweak it. And every now and then, some organizations will abandon it. But it is, if you look at the data worldwide, it is a very small minority of organizations who've tried this, who've ended up going back on it.
I guess it's really hard to go back when employees are already used to it and see that actually it's working.
Well, I think this is it's actually one of the biggest fears for leaders going in, which is, if we try this and it doesn't work, then how do we avoid, backlash, resentment, people feeling very upset? And I would say it's not possible to avoid that entirely. But I think if you're really transparent with your employees, with really clear metrics so that people know going into the trial, here is what constitutes success for us as an organization, so that if and when you decide to change things or you decide to go back, at least people can kind of see very clearly, here's where we've fallen down and here's why we've fallen down. I think that's really, really important. It shouldn't be like a great reveal, everyone thinks it's going well and then all of a sudden, we're pulling the rug out. So I think that's a really critical thing to think about. One other point on that is we actually asked employees who participated in the trials the question of what would it take from a compensation perspective, from a salary perspective, to entice you to go back to a 5-day work week now that you've experienced this 6-month trial of a 4-day week. And I'm going to be sharing some of this data at the event later here today in Tallinn. But for a huge percentage of employees, they were saying we needed a pay increase of between 25 and 50%. Some were saying we needed a pay increase of more than 50%. For 13% of people, they said that no amount of money would persuade them to go back to a 5-day. So I think that shows the power of this from a financial perspective. I think when you think about, for many organizations that maybe can't compete at the top end of the salary scale, we're in a world where we're seeing a lot of pay inflation. If you're in an industry where inflation is running at 3 to 5% year on year, you're struggling to keep up and to afford those kinds of pay increases, actually the shorter work week offers you an option where maybe you can get away with lower levels of pay increase if you're offering people this additional benefit of extra time off. So thinking about that kind of time-money trade-off is one thing that many organizations, I think, particularly in the last year, as we've seen these kind of really pressures of the kind of level of inflation and the level of pay demands that are out there, this is a viable alternative option for many organizations.
Very good tip.
And now we are going to more the practical side of everything we already got there. So my question about the salary is that And usually in the research or in the trial companies, do they also like reduce the salary when they are going to 4-day work week, or like what is the ratio, or how they are doing it in the salary wise? What?
So the trials that I was involved in leading, the basic premise of them was a trade between employer and employee, which was around the employer offered a genuine reduction in work time. Didn't need to be necessarily 20%, but it had to be a genuine reduction in work time, and maintain salary at the same level. Mm-hmm. But on the other side, the employee was committing to maintaining output, so maintaining the same level of results within the organization, which obviously assumes an increase in hourly productivity. So I would caution against organizations using this as a tool to reduce salary, because I think a big part of the power of this lies in the psychological incentive, lies in the fact that actually, sharing the benefit of productivity gains and finding efficiencies with employees in the form of reduced work time. I think that you would lose quite a significant amount of that, positive momentum within your organization if this is being brought in simply as a means to reduce salary. But I do think that in terms of long-run planning, that an organization that offers a 4-day work week versus an organization that offers a 5-day work week can probably compete at a lower level of ongoing pay increase. So I would say this is not something that you do to cut pay, but it is something that you can think about in terms of saying, okay, over the next 5 years, maybe we don't need to pay the highest level of pay increases in our sector if we're also offering a 4-day work week.
Yeah, because indeed you're offering then more kind of vacation days, or like more free days. And how this is it with this vacation days? Usually, is the vacation policies are like the same, remaining the same, or and how it affects all the vacation or paid time off policies?
I would say in terms of vacation, it kind of depends on the starting point. So I've seen certainly organizations who have maintained vacation at the same level. Typically, those are organizations that are offering, statutory levels of vacation. I'm not sure what they are here in Estonia, but they're offering, not much more than the minimum legal requirement. But then on the other end, if you've got organizations that previously had a very favorable vacation policy and now they're also moving to a 4-day work week, then in that context, maybe revisiting and rethinking. A really common one would be, let's say as an example, you're offering people currently 25 days of paid vacation. You move to a 4-day work week. I think it's reasonable to say, okay, we used to offer you 5 weeks of paid vacation. Now, as we move to a 4-day work week, 20 days is now still effectively 5 weeks. So we make that kind of pro rata adjustment. So people still have the same, number of weeks that they can take off, but there's a reduction in the number of days overall. But I mean, people still come out obviously, much better off in terms of time off over the course of the year.
Mm-hmm. We were talking, or you were mentioning, we have the listeners who might be interested in practicing 4-day work week. So what are the companies that this going to 4-day work week is easier than the others? Like you mentioned, some of the things need to be there, but do you give like, okay, if you have like this, and this, then it's for your company, it's definitely easier to implement 4-day work week?
I would say it's interesting, if you look at the types of companies that do this and the types of companies that reach out to my organization, it is actually quite hard to categorize them from a kind of industry perspective, because it's much more to do with leadership and culture than it is to do with the type of work that people do. So this tends to be attractive to very forward-thinking, innovative leaders who really pride themselves and their organization on being ahead of the curve, on really being a kind of a early adapter, pioneer when it comes to the future of work, and organizations that have that kind of culture of trust, of autonomy, of experimentation. Those are the types of companies that are both drawn to this concept and are better placed to actually be able to make it work. If you've got a very top-down command and control type leadership style and type organizational culture, often you'll find that actually this will be met sometimes with skepticism rather than being embraced, because people will question, what are the motivations behind this? So, people really need to feel empowered to try new things, fail, iterate, adapt, and try more new things, you know?
And how to understand like what kind of flexibility works for your company? Because as you mentioned, there's not only like 4-day work week, there's different versions of flexibility. So to understand which is the one you should trial first.
Absolutely. And that, you know, one of the big tests I would always say, you know, this is a little bit simplistic, but if most of your organization's value is generated through availability and responsiveness to your customers, so externally, then you probably need to look at a version of reduced work time which involves everyone doesn't have the same time off. Whereas if you're, let's say, a marketing agency or a PR firm where it's very project-based, it's very much we need to get this piece of work done by this deadline to a certain standard, and the client doesn't care when it's done or who does it as long as they get the piece of work, then typically in that environment, you're actually better off with everyone having the same time off and maybe having a universal day off and office shuts on a Friday because you're maximizing the collaboration time that people within your organization have to actually work on those projects. So it definitely depends. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about the shorter work week is that it's a kind of a very rigid model, whereas in actuality, this is really about moving the dial on the standard expectation, creating this kind of downward pressure on overall work hours. It doesn't mean that if you've got an emergency or if you've got a very busy period in the year or you've got, you know, a kind of a client demand or client deadline which needs to be addressed, that people won't still have that discretionary effort and that flexibility to deal with that. One example that I've heard used recently, which really resonated with me, was a software company I've worked with in Toronto in Canada who's done this, whereby they talk about how they have some people who on a Friday, it's almost like they call it the gift of the fifth. So, you know, most Fridays people have it off. Some Fridays they might have to work an hour, they might have to work 2 hours, they might choose to work a half day to clear some of their other work. But these are people that previously, when they were working a 5-day work week, were often using Sunday evenings or using some of their other evenings during the week to kind of catch up and to keep on top of things. What they found is that now, even though they've moved to a 4-day week, even though people are still doing a little bit of work on a Friday, now they're not doing that work on a Sunday evening. Now they're doing the work they used to do on a Sunday evening on a Friday morning. And so it means their weekend and their time off is much more protected. And they're coming back to work on a Monday much better rested, much more energized.
Let's pretend like we have now the company or the people who are listening, they know that they have the culture in ready, they have the leadership team ready to implement 4-day work week. What are the other things then? We were talking about operational excellence and all the other practical sides that you have to think of when actually start implementing 4-day work week.
Yeah, so again, I'll give the kind of, a lot of this is so organization specific, and that's why we really recommend doing that diagnostic process so we understand the context, we understand the challenges the organization has, identify specific areas of improvement relevant to that organization that they should address as part of their planning phase. However, if we look at, certainly in knowledge work, certainly in kind of like, those kind of white collar, typically desk-based organizations that we talked about, the big buckets of inefficiency are overlong and unnecessary meetings, distraction and interruption in the workday, poor use of technology, and kind of outdated processes. And so those are the areas that if you can kind of get a handle on, how can we put a framework in place to address those areas, there is, I would say, in the vast majority of organizations today, there is between 15 and 25% worth of inefficiency hiding in those areas. And actually, we talk about how the shorter work week is actually already here. It's just buried under the rubble of all of this inefficiency, which over the last 10 to 20 years has started to become ingrained in our work. And really, this is about kind of creating that, creating this constraint around time, which really forces people to address those issues.
Just wondering now, business owners are listening to us and thinking, okay, yes, I will get my team more efficient, less meeting, and we work smarter. why should I go to the 4-day work week? I should continue with 5-week and will grow my profit because we start working 15 to 20% more efficient.
Sure. And I mean, I would say every organization should be committing to, on an ongoing basis, continuous improvement, operational excellence. But there's also a reality here. So if we talk about what's the current situation, if you were to ask the vast majority of leaders, even if they think the 4-day week is a crazy idea, if you ask them, do you believe that today you are getting 40 hours worth of highly productive, highly focused work out of all of your employees? And I think most of them would give the honest answer to say, no, we're not. And we know in so many organizations that kind of Friday afternoons is a little bit more of a dead time. It's not quite as productive. So the question is, do you cover your eyes and accept that reality because your norms and your belief system, makes you kind of repel at the idea of giving people an extra day off? Or do you say, okay, that's the current situation, so can we do something to try and address these issues? So I guess my answer would be yes, of course. If you can find a way to find all of those efficiencies in your organization and just bank them against cost savings or revenue increases, then fantastic. But I mean, if it was that easy, everyone would be doing it already. So if it was just so easy for a manager to walk into an office and say, hey, everybody, I want you to get 20% more efficient right now, then of course. But the reality is that if the only incentive for people to become more efficient is to create space for more work, then I'm not sure you're going to be quite as successful as all of these organizations that I've worked with who've used the shorter work week as a way to kind of tackle those issues.
Now, the other side of the coin is that if you keep increasing the productivity, then you might increase also the burnout, and the other aspects might come on your table. So, what are the situation or your research and trials show about this thing?
I'm glad you asked that question because it is one of the other big concerns that both leaders and employees have going into this process. And again, if you do this and change nothing else, then it's quite possible that does become a factor. So if you do nothing around resource planning, workload management, and you just move straight to a reduced hour work week, you might exacerbate some of those pressures. But the reality is that, again, if you look at the trials, the evidence demonstrates that burnout, work-related stress going down, mental health going up. And the reason for that is one of the really interesting findings was that within the trials, pace of work, so people's experience of work intensity, actually went down by 2%, which feels, again, very counterintuitive. But the reason behind this is that people were not doing the same work in the same way in less time. They were achieving this not through speed up, but through redesign. So it is really important that this is about rethinking and changing the way that you achieve the same goals, rather than saying, we're just going to do everything the way we used to do it, but we're just going to do it faster and we're just going to do it quicker, because that is a recipe for burnout.
And a lot of people, when we have implemented 4-day work week, is that, okay, now you don't have time for the coffee corner chit-chats and then just this random meetups with people because you have to be productive all the time. Is it something that the companies need to be taking into consideration when implementing it?
Absolutely. And, we see this a lot, even just with companies trying to design remote first, hybrid, on-site work models. How do we get that balance right between individual productivity, collaborative innovation, connection? And I would say two things. The first is you need to plan for that. Leadership development, team building is not an inefficiency that needs to be rationalized. It is something that is absolutely critical to the good health and functioning of any organization. So that is something that companies moving to a shorter work week need to deliberately plan to ensure that's maintained. But often what we've seen, again, somewhat counterintuitively, is that organizations who have moved to a shorter work week have seen increases in people's sense of teamwork and collaboration, because this is such a collective endeavor, that this is something that, no one person can change how their team meets, how they collaborate, how they communicate, their processes, how they use technology. These are all things that require people to work together towards this kind of common goal of a shorter work week in order to be able to figure out. And so as a result, it can tend to lead to a real collective spirit where, everyone knows that just me being very productive and efficient, that won't be enough. I need to lift everybody else up as well, because that's what's going to be necessary in order to make this work.
And my last and absolutely also favorite question about 4-day work week is that, look, you also mentioned that Fridays afternoons are unproductive, and people know that it's people are taking it more loose. What happens now if you have 4-day work week? The Thursdays now replacing Fridays, and the Thursday afternoons becoming this, unproductive parts, and people are already swinging off to do the weekends.
No, I mean, I think that there is an assumption here that maybe we'll get to a day in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years, I don't know, whereby being a 4-day week company will be just the norm, okay? And then in that environment, then maybe you can do this without this kind of elevated sense of accountability. But today, in order to be a 4-day week company in a 5-day week world, where most of your competitors, most of your clients, your stakeholders are all working 5 days, that requires a real commitment to, continuous improvement. It requires accountability, responsibility. It requires, the policy to be very conditional on performance. And so, one of the interesting things about this is there are some people that would say, 4-day work week is kind of a policy for lazy, Gen Z, woke people who don't want to work, right? You've maybe heard this. I don't know.
Yes, of course.
But when you actually get down into it, I've seen many organizations whereby people who are, let's say, coasting through the work week, maybe not at the highest level of performance within their organization, actually they would prefer to work 5 days with less accountability than work 4 days with a much heightened sense of accountability. And I've seen people leave organizations because they do not like the extra scrutiny that comes with this benefit of the because it's not just from the organization and it's not just from the metrics, it's from your colleagues, that actually this is something where this benefit is so life-changing and so transformative for people that if you're not pulling your weight, you're letting other people down. You're putting that in jeopardy. So this is something that actually we've really seen high performers embrace once they kind of, it takes a little bit of time, that mindset shift, but once they get there, I think they really buy into this idea.
Super interesting. We have coming to the end of the podcast now. Time is ruthless. We have 2 last questions for you about yourself and some recommendations. So you can just say the first thing that is on your mind, and then there's a really fast and quick questions, answers. So who is the person who inspires you?
This is definitely one that I should have given some thought about. And I've been asked this on a podcast many times, and I think I've always given a different answer. This is kind of, not to kind of to bring too much of an emotional string to it, but I lost both of my parents about 6 or 7 years ago. And I would definitely say in different ways, they kind of inspire me and drive me and motivate me in my day-to-day work. I think as you get older, I think that maybe that kind of inspiration resonates and means a little bit more to you than the traditional kind of, maybe 10 years ago, I would have said an American football player or a rock band or, a business leader. Mm-hmm. But definitely, strangely, my dad was someone who, worked crazy hours. We were not from a particularly well-off background. He was working 2 jobs, coming home late at night. But definitely, he instilled a work ethic and a determination in me, which I think, in some ways is we're in a different world today than what he occupied. I'm fortunate that my circumstances are different, but I think that, as I've just described, the shorter work week is not about, low work ethic. The shorter work week is about, figuring out that the human body is human energy is not a kind of infinite resource, and that actually the most productive people are the people who figure out that productivity is not all about hard work. It's about all of these other things: rest, sleep, exercise, healthy eating. So productivity and well-being are, if you look at the science, they're complementary forces, not competing forces. And you really need to recognize that. So anyway, I went off on a little bit of a trajectory there, but certainly from my dad and my mom, I think they bring different things that inspire me day to day.
A great answer. And please give one reading or listening recommendations to our listeners.
I'm going to go with a new one because I'm pretty sure this is something that maybe is not here in Estonia just yet. There's an author, he's actually a Canadian author called Dan Pontefract, who has just released a book called Work-Life Bloom, which kind of challenges, first of all, the concept of work-life balance, basically saying that, in today's society, work-life balance is kind of a misnomer and a myth. And secondly, he kind of challenges a lot of the kind of conventional thinking around employee engagement, and kind of, almost says, well, actually, we don't need people to be fully engaged all of the time, and that what we need to think about is less about work-life balance and more about work-life bloom and how people's kind of work and life can really complement and elevate each other. So yeah, I think it's just been released in the US in the last couple of weeks, but I attended the book launch in Toronto about a month ago. I haven't actually read the book yet, so it's a bit weird that I'm recommending something that I haven't read yet. But based on what I know about Dan and the kind of overview he gave of the different areas in the book, I think it's something that would be worth reading.
Okay, thanks. And Joe, thank you for taking time. I know you are very busy in Estonia, so thank you for taking time to come to our podcast. Thank you for sharing your outcome of the research of 4-day work week. Also, I mean, it's great you a little bit kill the myth that it's only for certain type of companies. So it's all about preparation. It's all about, leadership and things. So thank you for sharing us. And I hope more Estonian and companies are considering to at least to try it out in some certain period.
Absolutely. Real pleasure to join you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.